Welcome back, friends. It's time to gather around the Word of God again in our Mind Space program, and we get to memorize a new verse. We're starting a new month, and we get a new verse. This is one of my favorite verses of all time, and it was written by one of my favorite authors of all time. The Bible has many authors. It was written over a span of more than 1,000 years, and the authors came from all walks of life. Some were poorly educated, some were rich, some were poor. You can see that represented in their literary abilities sometimes. And as a result, the Bible contains a wide variety of styles. And you can see that, especially if you have the opportunity to study the original languages, the Greek and the Hebrew. Today, we get to study one of the greatest authors, not just of the Bible, but of all time. Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, who wrote the book of Isaiah, shows by the quality of his writing and of his poetry that he is a highly educated and incredibly talented writer. And in the book of Isaiah, we find some of the greatest poetry, not just in the Bible, but ever written in the world today. I could easily pick the next 6 verses to complete our year program just in the book of Isaiah because I love it so much. And even though this is translated, obviously, into English and a lot gets lost in translation, there's still such a power in the imagery that Isaiah uses that we still, even in translation, get a gut-level reaction to the power of his imagery and his words. Add to that the fact that he is not just speaking for himself, he is passing on to the people of Israel the words of God. And in this passage that we're going to read today, he is actually speaking for God to the people of Israel and demonstrating to them how God would speak to them if they could actually see God like they are seeing Isaiah in front of them. It makes this an incredibly powerful passage. It is from the book of Isaiah, chapter 55. Chapter 55, and it's verse 1. It's the beginning of the chapter. So let me read it for you real slowly, and I'm going to put it up on the screen so that we can all read this slowly a couple of times together. It says this: "Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and he who has no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without price." Now, it's good to know the context, right? Obviously, we are talking about spiritual things here. Isaiah is not talking about the possibility of hungry people getting some food. He is talking about God speaking to his people directly and saying, if you would just come and walk with me and surrender to me, I will give you what your soul needs. I will feed you. I will allow you to grow into a tree of life. That is what God is saying through Isaiah. And I would invite you to go on and read the verses that come after, because God continues to talk. And maybe next week I'll talk a little bit more about that. But right now, let's just all say this together very slowly once again. Come, everyone who thirsts. Come to the waters, and he who has no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. And this teaches us this strange conundrum that is true of knowing God. The gospel, that is what we call the good news, the fact that we can be reconciled with God and walk with him and become his family forever, is free. But at the same time, it costs everything. Now, you should know this because we memorized Romans 12:1. Remember what that said? It said, "I urge you therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices." Well, that doesn't sound free, does it? And it's not. It's literally everything. So this is, in a sense, a trade, but it's an unequal trade. God offers himself, and we offer ourselves. That's how it works. So the gospel is free in a sense, but it also costs everything. And we're reminded of that when we memorize both of these verses, which seem to have such contradictory teachings coming out of them, and yet they make sense in God's world. One last time, come everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and he who has no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Well, we're going to get a lot more familiar with these words over the next 3 weeks, but I hope you just soak in them, not just in the beauty of them, because these are truly beautiful words. If you were to memorize a poem, this would be worth memorizing, even if it had nothing to do with your soul. But when you add to it the fact that Isaiah says this is God speaking to you, then there's a wellspring of transformation that can come out of not only knowing, but believing and applying these words.